Okay, here we are at the second part of the Chapter 35 PowerPoint, An Age of Anxiety. And we're getting into the global depression. So you probably remember learning about this from American history, but I'm going to try to add a global spin onto the challenges to capitalism, depression. First of all, the United States crash of the stock market on Black Thursday, the 24th of October, 1929, brought an end to economic recovery that had marked much of the 1920s. But there had been profound economic problems that existed beneath the surface for years leading up to that crash. So, first of all, a lot of economies were what's known as single export economies. And these were economies that were industrially underdeveloped and produced only one type of raw material, which left many of them highly susceptible to the boom bust cycles of laissez faire capitalism, and in fact, any type of capitalism. And the industrial powers could really control this. So, for example, with new technology like reclaimed rubber, all of those rubber plantations um, in Indonesia and in the Congo were now suddenly in trouble. Um, and with places like Ceylon, you just had these massive unemployment. The United States, Germany, and the former Allied nations were playing a dangerous balancing act involving loans, investments, and reparation payments, which you can see here. America was loaning Germany money to pay its reparations under something called the Dawes Act, where they got money from investors, and these investors were used to loan Germany money. So Germany would use that to pay reparations to Great Britain, which were greatly decreased because Germany could not pay the original amount. And then, following that, Britain would pay their loan debts to America, right? So basically, that same money was going round and round and round and round. But if any part of this system was suddenly cut out, or as the case might be, you have a huge economic crisis on your hands. In addition to that, agricultural overproduction was lowering the price of wheat, which meant that there was a lot of farmers who were having their income destroyed, and the demand was also going down. And farming, remember, was still a huge business, and or a huge amount of people were involved in farming, and this was really awful. The lowest price in wheat during this time period, or the price of wheat was the lowest in 400 years. And this is a very big deal because the demand of farmers were demanding a lot of industrial goods. Um, so this crisis just didn't hit the farmers, but because of how economies are interconnected not only across the globe, but within an economic system, this is very bad. So when people have more money, they spend more on goods, right? Which helps to supply jobs. So like I said, the crash of the United States stock market on Black Thursday, October 29th, brought an end to the economic recovery. Black Thursday was a horrible day. There were 11 suicides as the stock market seemed to just crash. Now, what you need to remember about this is that, and you should read this over in the book because it does a good job of explaining this, but stocks or shares in a company were bought on margin, which meant that they were bought on loan. This decreased the savings rate in America, and the savings rate was already fairly low because people were putting that money into stocks. A small amount of investors were actually using the stock market compared to about 50% today. It was a much lower percentage. But as the stock market slowed down, investors pulled away, and all of those stocks that were bought on margin, those loans suddenly could not be paid back. And that's kind of the way the basic demand worked in America. So this led to a dramatic decrease in world trade, which just aggravated the problems that were already there in these single commodity countries. It was like an entire house of cards just collapsed. With the exception of the Soviet Union, which by and large removed itself from the world economy, most of the rest of the world was dragged into the Great Depression. A rise of unemployment and a dramatic decrease in industrial production and trade caused suffering on a global scale. And you can kind of see that here. So as investors pulled away, layoffs created a surplus of inventory because people were not purchasing things because they didn't have any money. And as that happened, banks and businesses began to fail. Banks because they were invested in these businesses and they had loans to these businesses and they couldn't get any of that money back. And businesses because there was nobody purchasing their products. You might remember the bank runs from US history last year, which was at the very beginning of the Great Depression. So dramatic decrease in world trade between countries was kind of a result of this concept of economic nationalism, which was the idea that you wanted to trade within your own country first and to promote your own country first. However, because of the incredible interconnectedness of the world, that really did not work out very well. People needed these partners. So things like the Smoot-Hawley, which you have in your book, Tariff Act, only led to more tariffs and even less trade. Eventually, the United States, Italy, and Japan found ways of jumpstarting their economies and began the process of fighting out of the Great Depression. The United States with the New Deal and also with World War I. And we'll talk about how Germany and Italy get there in just a second. Japan we're saving for the next chapter. It's important to convey the tremendous amount of suffering that the Great Depression caused. I'm sure many of your grandparents did not live through the Great Depression, but mine did, and it left a lasting impression on them. You had people who were sometimes called Okies, who were migrating. That was kind of a bad term, but they were migrating from place to place looking for work, just completely desperate. And this picture has really been used often to convey that. And these people here, you can imagine this line of unemployed people who are looking just for a meal. It was truly a terrible time in American history, and the suffering of normal people was just incredible. As an example of that, before we get to the example, just remember the New Deal, like I said, was based on the Keynesian economic principle of deficit spending. So 43,000 people gathered on the lawn and actually camped on the lawn of the spring and summer of 1932. These were people who were part of World War I veteran family group. These World War I veterans had been promised a redemption or like a bonus for their service. And because the United States government was out of money, these soldiers were not going to be paid that bonus that had been promised. So these people were truly in dire straits, and they were looking for what had been promised to them, and they could not get it. And so eventually a bill was passed after the spring and summer where people did receive compensation, but it was an example of how far things had gone, how bad things had gotten, that we couldn't even pay back these people who had fought for us in World War I. That's where we're going to end this part of the PowerPoint, and in the next part of the PowerPoint we'll get into challenges to liberalism, the USSR, the Germany, and also Italy.